Good evening, everybody. I bet you were not expecting the old bait and switch. I came here to hear David, and he's been doing an awesome job. But you're going to hear me tonight. David asked me to take a few of the classes for him, which I'm happy to do. I always like teaching, mostly because it challenges me to study. And it causes me to spend time doing what I probably should do every day anyway, which is open my Bible and speak. But I find when I teach a class, especially a class of adults, I don't want to sound like an idiot, at least through any fault of my own. So I like to study a little bit before I do this. We're talking about whiners in the Bible. David came to me, I don't know, a year ago maybe, and told me about this concept. Was it that long ago? And he's like, oh, Wes, I don't get to teach much. I want to teach. I'm so tired of not teaching. Please let me teach. So I put him on the schedule. And as soon as I put him on the schedule, he's like, oh, Wes, this is so much work. I hate this. He starts whining and grumbling. No, he didn't do any of that. He just asked me to fill in. It is a lot of work, and I'm happy to help. So tonight we're going to start a conversation about the Israelites. But before we do that, let's have a quick word. Our Father in heaven, we love you, and we know that you love us more than we can possibly understand. Thank you for Jesus Christ. Thank you for salvation that we have through him. We thank you for the example that he left us, the words that he taught, the way that he lived, so that we can mirror him in our lives and be pleasing to you and encouraging and helpful to the world around us. Lord, we thank you for preserving your word for us so that we know what it is you would have us to know. Lord, we thank you even for the examples of old of those people who were followers of yours but still were weak and had their failings. And we know that these examples are here for our learning and for our edification. We pray, Lord, that you will help us as we study from your word to have better insight and understanding how you would have us to do, so that we can faithfully follow you, so that we can encourage those around us, so that we can do this work. We call this in Jesus' name. So tonight we're going to start a conversation about the children of Israel. This will take a couple classes to get through, but is there any greater example that you can think of whiners in the Bible than the children of Israel? They're kind of the poster children for whining and grumbling. In fact, they're the ones who says, they grumbled. They grumbled all the time. And we're going to talk about all of the grumblings that they had. David has already covered some of those when he talked about Korah and his rebellion, when he talked about Aaron and Miriam. We'll talk about many of the other documented cases of them whining and grumbling and complaining. But I wonder, and I want to talk about tonight, I wonder if the seeds of their grumbling might have been in their DNA. Did they invent grumbling? Did they invent complaining? Did they invent being pessimistic? Did they invent looking at a good situation where God was providing for them and where God had promises for them and turn it on its head? Were they the originators of all of that? I don't think so. So I want to explore this idea that maybe there were some seeds. And so we're going to go back in time a little bit to even before the children of Israel, before the nation of Israel, and just talk about some things that are recorded for us in scriptures that might have just kind of planted some seeds. So you don't have to answer these, but is there anything in the lives of Abraham or Isaac or Jacob that might have planted seeds? Is generational grumbling a thing? Is that a possibility? Can one generation's actions and attitudes carry over to future generations? You see that today? Of course, who knows who these guys are? Bingo. Vance Hatfield, Randolph McCoy. You've heard of Hatfield and McCoy? A 30-year feud based over a misunderstanding about a guy who was in fact murdered, but not murdered by the guy who he thought murdered somebody else. But they had a long, multi-generational feud that resulted in many, many deaths. And of course, even people who don't know the story of them, they kind of know, they talk about families that bicker and squabble as being like the Hatfields and Nichols, right? And this was something that the children and the grandchildren carried on, even though they may not have fully understood why they were doing it. It was just, we hate them, they hate us, we shoot each other, we make a lot of whiskey, and we try to not get caught. And that was what they had done for generations and generations. And so I want to discuss the fact that there can be generational grumbling, and that this is something that maybe the children of Israel acquired over time. Before we do that, I want to ask this question, and David may have brought this up, and I will in the early classes, but why do people whine? What is the benefit to whining and complaining and grumbling?
Well, they're usually dissatisfied about something,
Right?
and they're complaining to others to gain support or justify their feelings.
Okay, so they're dissatisfied. Are they always dissatisfied?
It's an attention getter.
Yeah. Okay. So just trying to get attention, just trying to express dissatisfaction, Nathan?
I think that it's part of a problem-solving process. So we often try to sort through what we're going through, how we've been treated, or the situation that we're in, come to a conclusion on what can we do about it. However, sometimes we get stuck in that wheel because it's too complex, or it involves other people and their actions, and so we get to a spot where we have to walk away saying, well, there's nothing I can do about it, it was their fault, and we get into a whining wheel of whining where it's like just keeps spinning because there's no next step to take.
Okay. Or maybe there is a next step to take, but it's too hard. Or maybe they haven't thought it through thoroughly enough. They got stuck at the whining phase and not at the actual problem solving phase. Okay, any other thoughts? Why people whine? We've covered some of it already. Some people just whine because they're jealous, they have envy. Some people whine just because they don't like the way things are going and they want them to go differently. Is there any benefit in whining?
What kind of whining do you get to?
Yeah, I mean, we have a phrase, a saying, don't we? Squeaky wheel gets the grease. I mean, sometimes people who just make enough of a stink many times over enough period of time. I mean, we have biblical examples of that too, don't we? Of the woman who constantly pressed and to get judgment, and just day after day after day. And Jesus used that as an example of be diligent, and approach your Father in prayer constantly. So yeah, sometimes there is benefit. Sometimes it just feels good. It feels good to whine and complain and get something off our chest. As you said, sometimes it just brings attention to us. So there are lots of reasons why people might whine. And sometimes it does work to their benefit, though it's typically temporary. If somebody whines and gets exactly what they want when they whine, how does that benefit them in the long run? Or does it? Yes.
It benefits them as much as the ill-gotten gain.
Yeah. It's of no real benefit. It may have a temporary satisfaction, but if you're a whiner and the way you get things is by whining and complaining, you're not really getting the change you're looking for. You're getting a quick fix, and that's not what we want. All right. Well, let's talk about this. So we're looking back at the history of the children of Israel and just looking at where there may have been some seeds planted that over time, as the nation grew, these old habits, old feelings, old seeds may have continued. And so I want to go all the way back to looking at Jacob. And of course, we know the story of Jacob. He was sent by his mother to go up to Haran and meet with his uncle Laban. And while there, he met Rachel. And what were the circumstances in which Jacob was fleeing up to Haran?
Just to deceive his father and take the birthright of Esau.
Yeah, he had basically not stolen, but ill-gotten gain. He took his brother's birthright with a bowl of soup, and then very intentionally deceived his father to get his blessing. And of course, Esau didn't appreciate that, And when Esau came to his senses and realized what a fool he had been about selling off his birthright and what had happened with Jacob and with his mother deceiving their father, Isaac, he was going to kill him. And so Jacob has to flee. He goes up to Haran, and there he meets his lovely cousin Rachel. And what are his feelings towards Rachel?
He loved her.
Yeah, he loved her. He was smitten with her. He wanted her. And Laban agreed under what condition? Worked for 7 years. And then so he got to marry Rachel, didn't he? Well, he woke up the next morning and there's Leah. Whoops, what happened? So he goes back and he complains, rightfully so. You gave me the wrong daughter. And what does Laban say?
Gotta marry the oldest.
He said, well, in our tradition, we don't give the younger away first. So he says, give it a week. Let this, whatever you call that time they have, the honeymoon phase, pass. And then I'll give you Rachel. Under what condition? 7 more years. And of course, Jacob agrees to this because he loves Rachel, greatly loves her. So he agrees, okay, I'll work 7 years for the daughter you tricked me into having, who I don't really like that much. And then I'll work 7 more years for the one whom I really love and the one whom my affection is really for. And so he worked for her, and so far, so good. He's going to work 14 years. But what are his options? He's going to go back to where Esau is and be killed? Or is he going to go somewhere else and maybe not have people he knows and some stability? So Jacob has made a very wise decision to go to his uncle Laban, who is wealthy and who is prosperous and has lots of livestock and has a way to support him and has at least one beautiful daughter. Maybe they were both beautiful. But we know that Jacob thought Rachel was beautiful. And so he set himself up there, and he's going to work, he's committed to work for 14 years in order to acquire his wife. And then we see that the family grows. And so, of course, Leah was clearly not the first choice, was she? And I'm sure that didn't work well for her. It didn't feel good for her to realize that, hey, I'm the older daughter, but I had to be pawned off in a trick in order to have a husband, so she's not happy. So we're told that God had compassion on Leah, and that she was able to have children before Rachel did, and that she ended up bearing Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. So there's 4 of the sons. Rachel got frustrated by this because she wanted to have children for her husband as well, and she couldn't. So she gave her servant Bilhah and told Jacob, here you go, have children with them. And so he had Dan and Naphtali through Rachel's servant, which was also acquired in the transaction for 7 years. And then Leah, not to be outdone, says, well, here's my servant, Zilpah. So Jacob is kind of living an interesting life here, isn't he? He's just having lots of kids with lots of ladies. And she turns over Zilpah and says, have children through her. That will be my children, but through my servant. And so there's Gad and Asher. Then Leah has more, Issachar, Zebulun. And then the only daughter that we read about, at least the only one who's named, is Dinah, which we'll talk about her later. And then we're told that God remembered Rachel. After all of these kids, God remembered Rachel. She got pregnant, gave birth to a son, and that was Joseph, of course. And then we read later, she gave birth to Benjamin. And of course, what happened when she gave birth to Benjamin? She died. So in childbirth, she died. So there's Jacob's children, all sorted out for you. What impact do you think that this relationship between Leah and Rachel would have had on Jacob's sons, particularly between the sons of the two women?
Jealousy, envy.
Yeah. And what do we know about the story of Joseph? They hated him. They hated him. And of course, why would they have hated him? And we'll talk about this more too.
He was favored.
He was favored. Why was he favored?
His first son.
Rachel's son.
Yeah, he was the first son of the wife he really wanted. He was the one who was given the special treatment and given the honors and the accolades. And he was put in a position of esteem over his brothers by Jacob, his father, because Joseph came from Rachel, the woman he really loved. So this could have all been Laban's fault if he would have just given Rachel and not Leah. But that's not how it worked out. And so we have here, we have the seeds of dissent and discord already. Now, of course, this is not a small family, this is a smaller than the nation of Israel family, but we already have it starting here with this group. We read that Jacob arrived pretty much just with the clothes on his back when he got to Laban. Of course, his family grows, God causes him to prosper, and as Jacob is prospering, Laban is prospering, because Laban's flocks are all under the control and the guidance and the protection of Jacob. And so God is blessing Jacob, and as he's doing so, everything is prospering. And Laban even noticed that. Laban even said that at one point to Jacob. He said, God is blessing you, and in return is blessing me. So he saw that. But Jacob is feeling like he's been wrong, of course, and he complains about this, doesn't he? I worked 7 years for Leah, who I didn't want. I worked 7 years for Rachel. I worked 6 more years for you tending your flock. So he spent 20 years working for Laban. And so what does he finally end up doing? Under what circumstances does Jacob leave? Not good. I mean, Laban laid it out for him, didn't he? You left in the middle of the night. You just up and left me. He says, Laban tells Jacob when he caught up to him later, he said, you took my daughters? I didn't even get to kiss them goodbye. You took my grandchildren? I didn't even get to kiss them goodbye. He said, if you would have just told me, I would have sent you off with songs and it would have been a party. But he said, you just left in the middle of the night and you didn't let us know anything. You just poof, you're gone with all of my family. And we read too that while they're leaving, Rachel stole Laban's household gods. And I don't know, they were small, obviously, because we're told they fit in the sack that she had on her camel. I don't know fully the significance of those, or exactly how many were, but he had these little idols that were in his home, and Rachel stole those and she hid them. And you remember when Laban caught up, one of his complaints was, you stole my idols. You stole my gods. Now, did Laban know who the God of Jacob was? He did. But he also had his own little gods that he worshipped. And he accused Jacob of stealing those. And what was Jacob was so insistent he didn't. What proclamation did he make? You remember? Yeah. He said, you can search the whole camp. We didn't take your gods. And if you find them, whoever has them, you can put them to death. And he made that statement. Of course, Rachel had them. And she was sitting on the little satchel that didn't have them in it. And she lied to her father. And she said, oh, it's my time of the month. Sorry, I can't stand up. And of course, he said, okay, fine. And he leaves, never found out. So, curious episode. Jacob has basically fled, taken everything with him. Rachel on the way out grabbed these gods. So I think we kind of covered this, why Laban was so resistant. Of course, first of all, he didn't want to lose his daughters and his grandchildren. That's an important thing, right?
I think he was more concerned about how he's prospered under Jacob.
I think that's absolutely correct. And he even said so. That he, but I am going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he loved his daughters and he loved his children, his grandchildren.
Well, but his deception, there's probably more deception in between those two than just Rachel and Leah.
Yeah.
The cattle and sheep and stuff.
Right.
So to just up and leave, I'm sure Jacob was worried that Laban would put some other condition on him to leave.
Yeah, Jacob, good point. Jacob clearly felt like he had, at this point, he says, your father has taken advantage of me. He says this to Rachel. He's changed my wages 10 times. He is, it's been a never-ending movement of the goalposts. And you can never fully satisfy Laban and feel, I guess, like he's truly independent. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't have recorded, but we can infer just based on what we do know. But he's left. Laban is very upset. I will still say I think he loved his daughters and he loved his grandchildren and cared for them. And of course, he did like the prosperity that came to him when everything was under the oversight of Jacob. And so he's quite resistant. Here's one. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have an answer, but why would Rachel have stolen Laban's household gods? I couldn't find a reason that she took them, or when she took them, and I couldn't find that she did something with them later, other than hide them and sit on top of them so she didn't get caught. Any thoughts about that?
In 31, like 14 through 15, at least what she's selling Jacob is they seemed upset about the way their dad was treating them, so they maybe stole them because they're actually worth money.
Yeah.
Just to get back at dad.
Might have been yeah, hey, this is what's owed to us. In fact, at one point, I think Leah and Rachel both said, all this prosperity, it's owed to us. We're his children, and you grew this wealth. And so, yeah, maybe they just thought we'll do something. Any other thoughts?
She might have worshipped in those days.
Okay, I hadn't considered that. It's possible that
That was kind of thing back then, was they would worship the true God, but in addition to worshiping the true God, they also worshiped idols.
yeah, and we certainly saw that when the nation comes back into the promised land, that they had God, and they took on lots of other gods. God,
Like maybe she was dismayed that her father was worshiping idols instead of hoping that it would turn his heart back to God.
yeah. So the other side of it could be that she through the influence of Jacob, right, and seeing firsthand how Jacob has prospered because of God, that she's like, my father, he needs to align himself with the one and only God and forsake all these others. And that was an act of compassion, maybe. Or maybe she was just a jerk and was really mad. Who knows? But either way, she stole them. I've always wondered, why did she steal those gods? I wish it would have told us more, but it didn't. It just told us she took them and then she hid them and said, I'm going to lie about it. All right. Well, so now we get Jacob has left the safety of Haran under the protection of Laban, his father-in-law. And he's going back to the land of his youth. And of course, that comes with possibly running into Esau, doesn't it? And that's who he was running away from 20 years before. And I like this quote in Proverbs, a brother offended is harder to win than a strong city. That's an interesting quote to consider. And we're going to see how that works out for Jacob here in just a second. So after parting ways with Laban, Jacob ends up running into Esau. He, in fact, his servants come and tell him that Esau and 400 of his men are coming to meet him. So Esau has gotten word somehow that Jacob is leaving. I mean, I'm sure people saw this huge family and tons and tons and tons of livestock migrating south. And so Esau is going out to investigate what that is. And of course, this caused great fear in Jacob. And he starts to make provisions to protect himself. And we see in chapter 32 that he splits everything into two groups. And this is assuming that Esau is going to attack him. He's not going to attack both groups. He's going to go after one. So Jacob's thinking, well, if I split everything I have into two, at worst I lose half of what I've got, which is probably still a lot. He set aside a very large number of livestock to present to Esau as a gift. And then, of course, he prayed about this. I like this quote. The Lord cannot fully bless a man until he has fully conquered him. It's from me to be chosen. You think that's true? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, you can be blessed if you've not been conquered by God, but fully blessed, you're not in a right relationship with Him if you don't have the full blessing of God. From a physical perspective, though, He'll bless you a ton.
Sure.
Even if you're not great.
What does it mean to be conquered by God? Yeah, he is truly your Lord. There's no he's 90% or 80%, 50%, only on Sundays. To be conquered means I am fully submissive to the Lord. And it's an interesting thought. We'll see. That's what we're going to see, I think, happen with Jacob. Is Jacob has spent his youth basically not the whole time plotting and scheming, but some of his youth plotting and scheming to get something that wasn't necessarily his. And then he took it, and then he had to run away and deal with those consequences. And then he spent 20 years building up again and doing some plotting and scheming along the way there as well, and left. And now he's come back, and he's got to face the facts, and he's got to deal with what he left him in his past many years ago. And he's rightfully scared, but he's going to get a lesson. Jacob made provisions to meet with Esau. We already talked about this. He sent his family and some of his flock across the river for safety. And then we read this very interesting encounter where he wrestles with God. He wrestles with the angel of God. However you want to consider that. I read a lot about this, and I figured it's God, but if he wrestled with God, God could beat him in a heartbeat. So I don't know, but an angel could too, but I know, right? So, but he had this struggle, and we're told that this struggle continued all night, just Jacob and this angel of God. And then he's touched at the hip, and it dislocates his hip, right? But Jacob is going to continue wrestling and fighting, and he basically says, I won't give up until I get a blessing from him, which he gets, and then his name was changed to Israel. And of course that means to struggle, and then he's told it means, your name is now Israel, and it means because you struggled with God and you struggled with him. So he's got a name change coming there. I think we all know that story. So I have a few questions. Jacob prayed a very heartfelt petition for protection from Esau, which he was worried about, but then he took all these measures to help to appease Esau. Does this show any kind of lack of faith in the power of God? Can we truly leave it all up to God? Any contradiction there in him praying for this, but then I'm going to go ahead and do all this stuff. I'm going to separate my flocks. I'm going to bundle up all these gifts to send to him. Is that contradictory?
No. God always expects us to try to do what we can. I don't think, just trying to think if he ever really hands stuff just to you without faith and action.
Correct. I agree with that. Anybody agree with that or disagree?
Yes, Your Honor. If Jacob didn't make the decision to go back to Canaan, though, didn't make that decision on his own. God told him
Right.
in Genesis 31:3, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you.
Yep. It's time to get out.
So it wasn't his decision to do that. God told him, I'm going to be with you. So what did Jacob think was going to happen when he met Esau? Did he think God wasn't going to keep his promise, that he and his wives and all his possessions were going to go up in flames? I don't know.
It seems like he thought that. Now we can dig into it, and maybe he didn't, and maybe all of the actions he took to appease Esau were genuine and heartfelt, and he meant every bit of it, but it seems like he was looking for ways to protect himself.
The question always is, what do you do after you say it?
Right.
There is a sense that you can leave it all up to God, because we've all been in circumstances where that's all that's left. You just put it in God's hands and it's, I can't do any more. But for most of our circumstances, we can pray. The question always is, what do you do about that? Like you said, we pray prayers all the time. We pray for the kingdom of God. The question is, what do you do to help that? Because you got to find one to run the kingdom. So there are two sides to that equation.
Yeah. There is an assumption that we can have a role, and I've thought often, I pray for things like, give me patience. Give me patience. Well, if I pray for patience, Is God just going to magically manifest me with patience?
He may give you trials.
Yeah. Hey, you got a daughter named Jessie. And there you go. 18 years later, you'll have some patience, bless. So, yeah, you know, when we pray for something, that doesn't necessarily mean, usually doesn't mean we're just done. All right, I prayed about it. There's almost always something we can do. You know, there are circumstances, of course. Somebody's battling a terrible condition, sickness. I'm not a doctor. Not much I can do about that other than pray. There are lots of things we pray for that we also should do something additional. Yes, sir.
We may be the very instrument God's going to use to bring it about.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Nathan?
Yeah, in this circumstance too, where he is praying that Esau will basically forgive, there's two sides to that, where he has to go in with humility in order to make that effort that he would forgive him, and then also, you know, pray to God that he would change Esau's heart. So there's still this element of, I have absolutely no control over what Esau is going to do, or how he'll react when I encounter him. However, I do know how I'm supposed to be when I come before him and, you know, appear in humility for that encounter.
You have a much more favorable view of Jacob than I do, I think. I have a slightly different view, and we'll talk about it. Let's talk about this, though, first. What was the significance of this encounter with God, or with the angel, this wrestling match, occurring when Jacob was alone? Nobody was there to witness this, what was obviously the most epic wrestling match ever. Went on all night. What was the significance of this happening alone?
Teach Jacob that God was with him.
Okay. Other thoughts?
There was no one else to intervene, to take him inside, get to do it on his own.
Yeah, I think this was a learning experience. This was an opportunity for him to do something. I mean, it's very strange, this story, very odd, obviously, but for him to have this battle on his own, and the fact that his hip was dislocated, very serious, very painful, but he continued to fight. I think there was something to that. With nobody else there to jump in and help, which would have been a mistake on their part, obviously.
Isn't that what they call one-on-one?
Yes, sir. And that's the beauty of wrestling, by the way. I wrestled in high school, and one of the things I always liked about it was me and one other person. And usually I lost, but there was something to going out there and just having battle with one person and knowing all this comes down to is how hard I've worked and what I've learned, and hoping that I worked a little harder and learned a little more than the other person. There was no, I can leave this to my teammates. You know, because what happens when you have teammates? Well, then it's like he dropped the ball, or he should have thrown it to me instead of him, and all that business. And so, something to wrestling that I think is a very beautiful thing, and that is one-on-one. And all you can do is do all you can do. And that's what Jacob did, and he wrestled on his own with no support, and ended up getting a blessing and ended up getting a new name. What about his limp? We know that after this, he had a limp that lived with him the rest of his life. Anything about that? Suffering to our benefit?
We often learn consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, sadly, we have to learn the hard way, right? Some of us, it seems. You know, it's just, you know, and I think about the love with my children now, 18 and 19 years old. A few lessons, they just trusted me and said, you know what, Dad said this, and I'm not going to mess with that. And there's a few they had to learn just by being fools. And sometimes all I can hope is you don't learn a lesson that is life impacting in a bad way. You know, learn a lesson, and hopefully short-lived the consequences. But yeah, he has this limp with him. So of course this is a reminder, a constant reminder of this struggle that he had with God, and it's probably a constant source of humility for him, isn't it? That he's got this limp. I think this was probably a life-changing moment for him, even though he may not have processed it immediately. Of course, looking back, this would have been a pivotal moment for him.
It was.
Yes, sir.
And I think if you live long enough, everybody gets it.
Yeah.
I think everybody, if you live long enough, you have a moment that for the rest of your life, you look back on it. And you think, that's where I got some clarity about life. That's where it made sense. That's where I saw myself. And it changed the focus of my life. You don't get that in your life. By the time you're your age.
No. I've had a few. That's a good point, that everybody at some point, you're gonna have a limit. And you're gonna have something that you think about all the time. And you remember all the time. Even if years pass. Hopefully that's the perspective we have. You know, as Christians, we hope that when those terrible times come, we find ourselves on the other side with a better perspective. It can be devastating for some people, of course, and ruin them, but I think that's not the intended consequence. All right, well, finally, Jacob ends up meeting Esau. He spent 20 years avoiding him. He goes back to the promised land, and immediately he's going to encounter him. And so here we go. Ask some questions first. Do you think that it took courage? David brought up the point that God told him, go. I'm going to take care of you. I'm sending you back to where you came from. I'm going to take care of you. I'll be with you. Does that mean that there was no courage involved?
No, but I kind of didn't respect Jacob for being at the very back of the group.
Okay.
He sent everybody forward first, and he's at the back, and you would have thought he would have been at least in the middle in front of Leah and her children.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. That's a question I've got up here.
Yes and no.
Well, I'm going to say this. I think it took courage. I think he was obviously scared, but he knew he couldn't avoid it, and I think that's okay. Even today, we face situations or conditions, and we believe, I think, in our hearts, God is faithful. God isn't going to give me more than I can endure. God will provide. We believe the promises we read. But that doesn't mean that we still don't have fear. We still don't have concerns. The question is, what do you do when you have those fears and concerns?
Well, Jacob also knew that Esau was a outdoors guy.
Yeah, he was a manly man.
He was a manly man. And so now, in the 20 years, Jacob probably thought he became stronger, bigger, grew up. But now he's got 400 other people with him,
Yeah.
probably of like mind and build and skills.
Yeah.
And Jacob was a mama's boy.
Yeah. I mean, Esau, for all intents and purposes, Esau has an army. And he was a warrior, he was a hunter, he was a mighty dude. Jacob was a dandy boy, but although I bet 20 years working in the fields makes you not so much a dandy boy, because he has to protect the flocks, and he has to do things. But yeah, he remembers what he left, and now, to your point, he's got a bunch more people with him. And so this is this terrifying situation, I think. And I think, if we put it and make it personal, most of us aren't going to find ourselves in this situation where we're encountering somebody we wronged, and they've got a posse with them to do damage. But sometimes, we still have to go and have that confrontation when we've sinned against somebody, or when somebody has sinned against us. Is that ever easy? It certainly shouldn't be easy, on either position. If we're the sinner, there should be a lot of humility there, and shame, and it should anguish us that we hurt somebody. And that's difficult. And we may not know what's the reaction going to be when I encounter them. And of course, if somebody comes to us to address the sin that they have committed against us, I would hope that's not easy for us. I would hope we don't take pleasure in letting them grovel and beg and plead and then tell them to think about it. That's not the position either. Either way, it's a difficult thing, and I've I've had in my many years, as Don pointed out, enough opportunities to be on both sides of that and to see other people who had to deal with it. And it's difficult. It's very hard. One of the hardest things I ever had to do in my life was confront somebody about something that they had done, and it was very difficult. It was very nerve-wracking. So this is a very difficult situation, of course, for Esau and Jacob, particularly Jacob, because he probably still thinks his life could be in peril, or at least his other good life could be in peril. So they met, they greeted, everything went well. Esau, if you remember the story, Esau, it's like, well, who's all this? And Jacob, Jacob is very humble. Well, these are my wives and my children, my Lord, and all this. Everything was good. Did Esau make any demands of Jacob?
Thanks. To go against a comment earlier, in 33:3, it actually says Jacob went ahead of his entire family and approached his brother first.
Right.
Which then gets back to the whole wrestling match with God at the end of whoever. Is all Jacob's life to this point, it was whenever something hard came around, he used deception and women and ran God out of the situation.
Yeah.
And now right before this situation, he has the fight with God and says, certainly I've seen God face to face and survive.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden the hard situation is coming. Jacob has finally put himself out in front, not using any deceptions to get out of it. And then we see then in 33, he says the exact same thing to Esau in verse 10. Now that I've seen your face and you have accepted me, it is as I've seen the face of God. And see the final, kind of what the wrestling match prepared him for going into this whole situation.
That's an excellent point. that match happening the night before, it set the stage. And if I can wrestle with God, and we call it a draw. I mean, I got a limp, but he didn't pin me, then I can handle a lot. Now, we are going to talk about, we won't have time tonight, but who did Jacob put at the back of the line?
His favorite son.
He put his favorite wife and his favorite son. And we're going to talk about that and what that could have meant for the rest of the family. But out of time tonight, I appreciate your comments. We're going to continue talking about this brief history, be a class and a half maybe, and then we'll get into the actual grumblings of the children of Israel. Thanks a lot for being here tonight. See you Wednesday night.